Good morning, everyone. We'll just give it a minute or so and we'll kick off. Okay, good morning, everyone. I will start today's webinar. I know everyone is all probably joining, so I'll just do a bit of an introduction to start off with, and then we'll move on to the main content. So my name is Faye Skelton. I am Head of Policy at Make UK. I am being joined by Fahim Khan, Senior Economist, Nina Griff, Senior Policy Manager, and Jamie Cater, Senior Policy Manager. We will do our presentations, we'll run through that. At the end of Jamie's session, just at the start of Jamie's session, we'll launch the poll. We've got a few polling questions we would really like you to complete. I'll then summarise the poll, and then we'll move on to the Q&A, which will probably take up at least half of the session. So if I kick off. Yeah, Wednesday was an overall really successful day for UK manufacturing. We had done a lot of work with Treasury in the lead up to the autumn statement, and we sent a long list of our policy recommendations. I think there was around about 35, and then we sealed it into our sort of top asks. So the top line that from the Wednesday's autumn statement is there was 4.5 billion for strategic manufacturing sectors. To break that down, our number one ask, which we got after it was years in the making, was permanent full expenses. So now businesses can claim 100% of their capital allowances on plant and machinery investments, and get 25p back in corporation tax. Just to say on that, we got a shout out from the Chancellor for that, and particularly with the work we did with members and just general manufacturers on getting the letter signed. I think we got over 200 signatories that we sent the Chancellor, and that really helped get that over the line. So that was really, really helpful. We also got an extension to expand the Made Smarter scheme to all areas in England in 2025, and also rolling it out with discussions with the devolved administrations in 26-27. There was 2 billion earmarked for green investment for the auto industry and aero industry. And we also had another win on apprenticeships. We got another mention in the Chancellor's statement around apprenticeships, 50 million over the next 2 years to increase the availabilities of apprentices in engineering and manufacturing, as well as other key growth sectors. And we'll be working closely with the government to make sure that is spent wisely. Jeremy will touch much more on that. There was also an announcement on investment zones. So the government is going to expand its next set of investment zones to Greater Manchester, West Midlands, East Midlands and Wrexham in Wales, doubling the funding from 80 million to 160 million. A few other things just to be aware of on the R&D tax relief. The rate at which loss-making companies are taxed will be reduced from 25% to 19%. And the threshold for additional support for R&D intensive loss-making SMEs will drop from 40% to 30%. And there was also a nod to the Harrington review, which is on foreign direct investment. So the government has committed to accepting the recommendations from the Harrington review, which essentially just to get more foreign investment into the UK, and we'll be working with the government on that moving forward. And the government also accepted the Low Pay Commission's recommendation on the national living wage and national minimum wage, and Jamie will be picking up on that one as well when he speaks. So to get into a bit more of the detail, I'm going to hand over to Nina to talk on Made Smarter.
Hello, everyone. Just before the autumn statement on Wednesday, on Friday, the government announced the backing for extending the Made Smarter adoption program. This is a fantastic news for the small to medium manufacturers in the UK. We know that Made Smarter adoption program that piloted in the Northwest was and is a really big success, helped a lot of small businesses, small manufacturers to adopt and get on that digital journey. With the program expanded some of the schemes across West Midlands, East Midlands, North East, and Yorkshire and the Humber a year and a half ago. And now it's going to be expanded across the all England, which is great news. It's going to end the postcode lottery for many manufacturers and businesses, and it will give access for everyone to seek impartial advice. The people who work in Made Smarter adoption will help manufacturers to get on that digital journey to seek what is the issue that can be resolved with digital technologies such as AI and machine learning, 3D printers, robotics. We've done a lot of research and spoke to manufacturers who use the program, and sometimes the return on investment can be within 1 year. Also, all our evidence shows that the impact of digital technologies is here and is huge. Sometimes it can increase the productivity up to 60%, and also efficiency, and it can help with energy efficiency and management, energy cost. Also, a very good news is that the expansion will involve the inclusion of internships. This is something we talked to when we were reviewing the program years ago. In 2019, we published a report. So this is really great to see, because as we know, the skills can be a problem, especially digital skills for manufacturers when they invest in new technologies and they don't know where to start. So all of this combined together, it's just a really good news, and I hope that this confidence in backing financial backing from the government will make this program for manufacturers to be more aware that it's out there and more consistent, and they can just use it for the benefit. That's all for me.
Thanks, Nina. That's really helpful. And just to say, all of the things are in this presentation. and also the things that are announced by the Department of Business and Trade last week, which covered Made Smarter. Department of Business and Trade are going to publish a manufacturing plan on this Sunday, which will include things that we're going to be talking about, but also cover things like clean energy and their battery strategy as well. So it's putting together all the things that the government wants to focus on into a plan, which is something we've been asking for quite some time. If we move on to investment growth, I'm going to hand over to Fahim.
Thank you, Faye, and it's lovely to see everybody. Just to start off with a few words of encouragement on this. I mean, this is a great win for Make UK and for all those who have called for 100% capital allowances to be made permanent in the UK. I mean, we are obviously the voice and messenger when it comes to representing you guys in government, but actually, you know, it's your members, it's the affiliates who all kind of backed us up, not just recently on the letter, but actually we've been doing research on this for over a year now, backing us up against responding to our surveys, giving us case studies, and it's really shown that actually if you just keep banging on the door, eventually they do listen. So, you know, I'm not going to ask everybody to unmute themselves so we can just applaud each other today, but I think it certainly deserves a pat on the back for all those who got behind this and got this through the line. So we should all know what capital allowances are. They're a tax relief that you can apply against your corporation tax if you invest in plant and machinery. If you don't know what they are, your accountant should definitely know. And if your accountant doesn't know, you should probably give a kick in the backside to ask them why they don't know what capital allowances are. Now we have that the full expensing has been made permanent, which means that you can get 100% first year allowance on main rate assets, which is most of the plant and machinery businesses we invest in. It can be used by any sector, any business, but we know according to HMR statistics that manufacturers are the biggest users of capital allowances. They account for about 15% of all claims every year, and that is the largest share, followed by the wholesale and retail sector that counts about 12% of every investment. 50% allowance on special rate assets. These are things like you might fit into your buildings, like lifts, like escalators, air conditioning, things that maybe if you were to ever leave your site, you probably wouldn't take them with you. These are the kind of investments that you can like. The only thing that doesn't qualify are vehicles, HGVs, that sort of thing, or assets that you might lease, which we know that SMEs may do, and secondhand capital equipment would not qualify. Whilst there's still some work to be done, we think that making it permanent was a much bigger deal than we realized, because actually, while super deduction was great and very generous, feedback from members told us that it was too short term, businesses couldn't plan ahead, and whilst you might not necessarily use full expensing this year, you know that it's going to be around post 2026, and you can plan your investments long term. So that is great, and well, the job is only about half finished, I think, at this point. So going on to the next slide. What comes next? So the Treasury has also announced, and they put this into the statement, they will be running a technical consultation. So this is something that we will be looking for feedback on from you guys, probably next year, on whether or not full expensing can be expanded to allow for the leasing of assets. So there is already precedent for leasing within the Treasury. So there's something you might already be aware of called the annual investment allowance, which is a £1 million capped 100% capital allowance that has been around for quite a while. It was recently made permanent in terms of the threshold last October, which is another thing that Make UK fought for over a year ago. But then there are concerns from Treasury on the misuse of the system if leasing was allowed, but also it might necessarily reduce the buying of brand new, because if businesses had the option to lease, and they may not necessarily buy new. So there are some concerns. So actually understanding how beneficial would it be for manufacturers if leasing was allowed? Is it actually something that you use, and would it make a difference? Outside of capital allowances, we're looking at business rates. Unfortunately, it wasn't the best news for manufacturers. The Chancellor announced a freeze to the small business multiplier rate, which is a specific multiplier that applies to properties that are valued with less than £51,000. and you don't really start to pay any business rates until you are over £12,000. So it's really that range. The challenge is that the majority of manufacturers are probably not operating in a site that's worth less than £51,000. And so the small business rates multiplier freeze is not going to necessarily benefit them unless you're in that lucky bracket. The VOA's statistics indicate that around just under 30% of industrial properties might fit into that category, but they're not all manufacturers. That also includes things like warehouses that are being run by companies like Amazon or big or like the retailers and that sort of thing. The next thing is the investment zone program extension. I think this is potentially a good thing. The expansion shows that the government is clearly committed to introducing investment zone in the UK, and extending the policy tools from 5 years to 10-year benefits, and doubling the envelope of funding available, which technically means that the year-on-year investment is unchanged. Could have some benefit. We'll have to obviously see how it's implemented. One of the things is worth keeping in mind of is that one of the benefits publicized by investment zone is 100% capital allowances for those who move into it. But now that the government has made full expensing permanent, there is not necessarily a differential of capital allowance treatment between investment zone or not in investment zone. So it will be interesting to see if that's something that they will still continue to take forward, or whether or not that can be replaced by another benefit. And of course, the merger of R&D tax release has already been described earlier, but if anybody wanted to comment on that, or I think we will, happy to give way now.
Thanks, Fahim. So we move on to employment and skills. I'm going to hand it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Faye. Morning, everyone. So we'll start off on the skills side of things, and Faye has already mentioned the most significant proposal we had on skills, which is the £50 million for a 2-year pilot to increase the number of apprenticeships, particularly in engineering. And the Chancellor mentioned other growth sectors as well. I think the definition of exactly what those are is still to be decided, but really encouraging news for us and our members in terms of that particular focus on engineering apprenticeships. We know that the number of starts in our sector has declined significantly over the last 6 or 7 years since the introduction of the apprenticeship levy. We're about 38% lower in terms of the number of new apprentices in our sector coming through. So really welcome that the Chancellor has recognised those concerns, the value of the apprenticeship route as a way into our sector for new young talent, as well as training some of the existing workforce as well. We don't know at this point exactly what that pilot scheme or pilot schemes are going to involve, but we understand that Treasury and Department for Education are looking to start taking that forward in the next few weeks, and will do so with our support. I think what I'm sort of encouraged by, having listened to colleagues this morning and seen what's happened over the last few days, is that this is an opportunity for us, I think, to test some of the ideas and interventions that we think will work in terms of getting more apprentices in engineering and manufacturing. We've seen the success that we've had with Made Smarter and with full expensing, where we've had initiatives that have started off as maybe a smaller scale pilot scheme or a time limited sort of intervention that we've then successfully made the case to be made permanent or to have a wider rollout or application. And my hope, at least, is that we can do something similar here, and that there's scope for us to test things that we think will work, and then make the case for those that have been effective to become a permanent feature of the skills training landscape, and hopefully get that number of new apprentices in engineering and manufacturing ticking back up again after a few years of decline. There were a couple of other announcements on the skills front that are worth touching on. The announcement of the National Academy of Mathematical Sciences. what we've seen consistently come across in the last few years in conversations with members is the increasing demand for skills in this space, like data analysis. So that would be something in this space that will help to support manufacturers to access those skills as they increase in demand over the coming years. And then on the Help to Grow scheme as well, we know that while take up so far of the Help to Grow management scheme has been relatively low, leadership and management is one of the biggest skills gaps that we have in manufacturing. And when we've surveyed members over the last year or two, it's something that's consistently been fed back to us, that both in terms of current demand and future demand, leadership and management skills are really crucial. I think particularly when we think about some of the changes that are happening in our sector, digitalisation, sustainability, responding to increasing demand for things like flexible working, those leadership and management skills are really high on people's agendas. So it's welcome that government is looking to provide additional support for skills training in relation to leadership and management. We move on to the employment side of things. Again, we've already touched on the increase in the national living wage and national minimum wage rates, which will come into effect from April 2024. It's fair to say that these increases are a little bit larger than we had anticipated when we engaged with the Low Pay Commission earlier this year, which is the independent body that advises government on what the rate should be each year. They had estimated that the increase for 2024 would be 7.1%. And you can see from the screen there that the agreed increase now from April 2024 of 9.8% is quite significantly above that level. And so what's happened there effectively is that there has been much stronger pay growth across the private sector in recent months. And so despite the fact that inflation has started to come down, that is sort of driving that larger than anticipated growth in all of those rates. The other thing that's happened there, as you might know, is government set a target 4 years ago for the main rate of the national living wage to reach 2/3 of median earnings. 2024 was the deadline for that effectively. And so what has happened really here is that some of the other concerns that we might have had about the large increase in the rate have effectively been sort of set to one side in order to meet that political target that was a feature of the government's election manifesto in 2019. I think what's frustrating about that, particularly for us, is that actually, if you look at some of what the Low Pay Commission has published over the last few days, they have acknowledged exactly the concerns that we set out at the time to them. You know, we know that while our sector pays well, and there are perhaps not many employees paid at that minimum level, it does have a really significant knock-on impact in terms of pay differentials, how you manage the rest of the workforce, and employment costs are now a really significant part of the overall business costs to our members. The LPC has recognised that and acknowledged that in its work, and even noted that, you know, the fall in inflation effectively kind of makes up some of the notional lost value of the national living wage over this year and next year. So the case that we had made, that they should really sort of recognise the knock-on impact on pay differentials, that if inflation does come down, which it has, that sort of estimate of 7.1% should go down rather than up. Those concerns have been acknowledged, but it's really been driven by that long-term political target. So we're continuing to make the case to government that actually this should not be about sort of political targets or kind of arbitrary goals over the long term for the national living wage. particularly as we go into election year, the nervousness, I think, is that we see some of the political parties trying to sort of outbid each other during that process and seeing who can offer the highest rate. We're going to be firm and consistent in making the case that, you know, this should be decided on the basis of what is economically viable, what is a reasonable and sustainable rate for employers to be expected to pay. Moving on to national insurance, obviously the kind of big headline that was trailed in advance of the statement was the cut to employee national insurance by 2 percentage points, which, you know, again sort of speaks to this point about increasing employees' take-home pay. And those reforms as well, so the self-employed, so the abolition of Class 2 national insurance contributions and reduction of Class 4 contributions. One of the areas that we've done a lot of work with, on with Treasury over the last 12 months or so is on health and well-being. We know in our sector that long-term ill health, whether that's physical health or mental health, has really taken its toll on workforce participation and recruitment and retention. So we've been working very closely with government to look at what kinds of interventions from a policy perspective can be put in place to support reduction in workers going off sick or leaving the workforce altogether because of ill health. We've seen a little bit of movement on that in this autumn statement. There are some voluntary measures being taken forward in terms of guidelines and some support for employers who want to do more on occupational health to do so. We're still waiting for some further measures, which I think might come in the spring, which are a bit sort of some harder measures around tax incentives, tax breaks for occupational health services. We've made the case for that over the longer term, and we're expecting Treasury to come back on that probably early next year. A lot of the other trailed stuff you will have seen in the media around social security, around more stringent conditions on welfare benefits and access to social security services, but also looking at more support provided through job centres for employers and employees. And then finally, on the immigration system, some small changes announced to business visitor visas. That will just sort of slightly liberalise that regime and allow a wider range of activities to take place when an employee is visiting the UK from an overseas branch or somewhere in the supply chain. So it just sort of loosens some of the rules around what exactly can and can't be done in relation to working on specific projects or working with a client. I think that's it on the employment and skills side.
Great, thank you, Jamie. I should have said we should have launched the poll by now, so if Lois could launch the poll. So we are, I'll just talk through a bit of reasons why we think this is so important. So we would really welcome your poll results when we go back to government and share our initial views and some of the other areas. So not so much the full expensing, but the other areas, like particularly the national living wage, for example. So it'd be really helpful if you could fill that out, and I will summarise that. And I will give just a few moments for that to happen. Whilst you're filling that out, I think if we just kick off on some of the questions in the Q&A, just so that we're not just sitting here in silence. So from John Gardner, does the aerospace funding extend to defence? I don't know that answer, and I don't know if anyone on this call, unless they wants to jump in, knows if it extends to defence. The Department of Trade and Business will be publishing their full set of announcements and the further detail that stacks behind them on Sunday. So I expect that will draw that out, but if not, we will talk to the Department of Trade and Business and find out if it does extend to defence. And the next question is also from John. John's put a lot of the questions in. Are capital net zero measures allowable for expensing? And I can see Fahim's already earmarked this one for himself.
Yeah, so it depends on what you mean by net zero technologies. I think if you're talking about measures like solar panels and that sort of thing, so solar panels does come under the special rate pool, which is the 50% first year allowance. It wouldn't come under the main rate pool. And then thinking about just generic energy efficiency, so newer plant and machineries tends to be more energy efficient than older one. They would automatically come under the plant and machinery category for main rate pool. So I think there's still some work there to maybe expand capital allowances to allow for more technologies. In fact, the IFS, one of their recommendations is that it shouldn't just be accounted for only specifically plant machinery, but should cover all types of investment. And it's also important to think about, even if you make those investments and take advantage of capital allowances, structural changes for energy efficiency can affect your business rates, which could also raise them in tandem, and so that they can work against each other, which is another area that at Make UK we have been kind of lobbying for more exemptions to business rates, because you can get capital allowances, but then your bills can rise elsewhere. So the answer in short is not exactly in the way you would like them to be accounted for, John, but it's an area of progress that we will be looking at for full expensing.
Thank you, Fahim. Look, Lois, are you okay to share the poll results? Fantastic, thank you. Look at that, was seamless. So on the first question, what impact, if any, will the rise in national living wage have on your business? At 59%, increase in pay for the lowest paid employees. And then I can see the second biggest on voters is 38% increase in pay for the rest of the workforce to maintain, I can't see, maintain pay differentials. So, and there's 44% because there's a multiple choice, there's increase in prices as well. So there's a bit of a mixed, response in those answers, which will be helpful. We will have a look at that in longer time. If we look at the second question, what would you like to see in the apprenticeship pilot? And this is really helpful because we'll be working closely with Treasury and DfE on this. 61% said an emphasis on upskilling and retraining existing workers, which is really helpful to see because that's also what we're thinking about. And financial incentives for key engineering apprenticeships, and also close behind at 47%, better pathway for school leavers, and also more flexibility in apprenticeship training delivery, which tallies with our thinking. So that's really helpful to see. On the third question, this is a nice simple one, will your business take advantage of the full expensing scheme? 62% said yes, with 30% saying maybe. So that's scope for businesses to look into, with 8% saying no. On the fourth question, does the exclusion of leased equipment make the incentive redundant for your business on permanent expensing? Only 17% said yes, the exclusion of leased equipment does disincentivize or the need for permanent expensing. The fifth question, would you like to see the inclusion of second-hand machinery in permanent expensing? A massive 89% said yes, that's a very clear answer for us to take back to government. And finally, how do the changes in R&D tax credit affect your company? So interestingly, 86% say that R&D investment will remain the same, with sort of equal amounts saying that it will slightly affect and make manufacturers invest more, and equally invest less. And finally, the last question: will your company take advantage of the Made Smarter programme once rolled out? So a bit of a mixed response on this one. 51%, yes, we will take advantage of the programme when it is rolled out. And 34%, no, we have no plans to use the programme. That is really invaluable feedback, and be a basis of our conversations with government over the next couple of months on how they ramp up these policies and get within the detail. Thank you. So if you move back to questions, a question that I'm going to hand over to Jamie. John says, I presume there is no changes to the apprenticeship levy per se?
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's another question as well further down on the levy being expanded to wider skills. So maybe if I take those two together. Yes, that's right, that there's nothing explicit on changing the levy. However, I think within the scope of this pilot, I think, you know, we will want that conversation to extend to the functioning of the levy, and how sort of flexible or not that scheme currently is, particularly around sort of transparency and where that money is going. So we're absolutely continuing to make the case for changes to the apprenticeship levy, and I think, you know, we see that as being firmly in scope of this 2-year pilot. In terms of expanding it to wider skills, I highly doubt that that's going to happen under this government. If you listen to any of the Chancellor's statement on Wednesday, just before he gave us our little name check, he was criticising the opposition for wanting to reduce, in his words, the number of apprentices. And the basis of that comment was the opposition's position on the levy, which is that it should be broadened out in scope to include a portion of that funding to be used for non-apprenticeship skills training. And so that this is the line that the government has adopted over the last few weeks, is that because the apprenticeship budget is mostly spent, I think about 99% spent at the moment, that any additional flexibility in the levy means that you would have to reduce funding for apprenticeships and effectively cap the number of apprentices. So that's the way government is thinking about this at the moment. We think there is scope to think about that a bit differently, and there should be room in the apprenticeship levy, given some of the contributions paid by employers that are being unspent, for a bit of flexibility around that to fund non-apprenticeship training, particularly around upskilling and retraining. So encouraging to hear that's come across in the polling question this morning, because that's what we're getting from the wider membership as well. So no, I don't think there's going to be anything significant on the levy, particularly around wider skills in the short term, but it's something that continues to be part of the conversation, and we're feeding that into those conversations as well.
Thanks, Jamie. When it comes to the apprenticeship levy, it's always a nuanced response on these kinds of things. If we move on to, we are sharing the slides after this, so you'll have access to the slides. At the Bank of England briefing last week, the forecast indicated GDP at 0%, maintained high inflation and maintained high interest rates in 2024. However, manufacturing output and purchasing managing index are indicating potential growth. What is the Make UK view, and how does the autumn statement influence your thinking? How do you feel about taking that, Fahim?
Yeah, just a quick comment, because I can see there's actually quite a lot of questions to go through today. So in terms of our kind of own forecasts for manufacturing output growth, so we do expect minimal growth in 2024, less than 1%, but we expect it to at least outgrow the average the UK average. Although I would disagree on the PMI point. We have been monitoring the PMI monthly, and I know the most recent one for manufacturing PMI on output, or the composite index, has been below 50, the 50 mark for about 8 months in a row now, which is the worst run it's had since the financial crisis. So actually manufacturing is on the decline. This is not necessarily down to anything specifically happening to the manufacturing industry, but global interest rates rising, not just the Bank of England, but the European Central Bank and the Federal, which is artificially trying to slow down economies to reduce order books. But what we're seeing is a kind of a double impact on manufacturing, where orders are starting to fall off because of that slowdown. But manufacturing has, at least for about a year now or 2 years now, been propped up by a backlog of orders that they had received during the recovery period post-pandemic, and that we are seeing starting to dry up. So now the autumn statement is unlikely to impact this significantly, because this is a change in the kind of general economic environment. And whilst full expensing will enable maybe greater investment for long-term future growth, we don't expect that to affect so much in 2024 or even 2025 in terms of the output that manufacturing will produce.
Thanks, Fahim. Okay, so moving on, I'm going to go to Jamie, where he can pick up NI changes for employees and employers, and also occupational health support questions, if you can see those, Jamie.
I can, yeah, thank you. So the national insurance changes, unless you're self-employed, are just for the employees. So the class 1 NIC reduction is just on the employee side, not on the employer side. And then there's obviously those class 2 and class 4 NIC changes for the self-employed. So it's very much geared towards the employee rather than the employer. And as I say, we're sort of doing, trying to do some thinking around the overall burden of sort of employment costs on businesses, and where we think those might most sensibly be eased moving forward. On occupational health, it's a really good question. In terms of the things that we're expecting to see from Treasury early next year, that's quite limited in scope, in addition to what is already eligible for tax relief. So at the moment, that currently applies to sort of recommended medical treatment that's funded by an employer, and annual health screening and medical checkups, counselling, and things like eye tests and glasses, contact lenses. The proposal is to increase the scope of that for more regular health screenings and checkups, specific treatments that look at reducing absence, with a particular focus on prevention and flu vaccinations. So those are the specific measures that are in scope in terms of those kind of harder measures around financial incentives. In terms of the softer stuff that has been announced as part of the autumn statement, that has a slightly wider scope, not terribly well defined at the moment, but it's a really great point around EAPs, and exactly how much support there is for those, and around training as well, which is of course a really important part of that. And I think that's well reflected in some of the softer measures, but perhaps could do with a bit more support. So that's one for us to continue to engage with government on.
Thanks, Jamie. If I can hand back to Fahim on R&D tax credits, and there's
I'm sorry for like, I can grab on R&D tax credit. Just this is something I've been working on with members on, getting some feedback on consultation for the Treasury, sort of for like chipping in. I saw a question from Anonymous, and I saw a question from Steve about what is the simplification. So basically the joining up the two schemes, the SME scheme and RDEC scheme together. So this is what they call simplification in practice. Not sure if that's going to be benefiting manufacturers that much, but we can look into details. We also have a partner that we work very closely on advising manufacturers how to use tax credits. And they provide a very good practical advice because it's a very complex scheme. And also by joining these two schemes, we just need to make sure that SMEs are not being put in disadvantage there as well. But more details to come on this because it's a tax. We kind of need to go into the tax experts for that one.
Great, thank you, Nina. If I can hand back to Jamie, so there's two questions I can see towards the top of the pile. So there's one on looking into the lowering of ages at which the top rate of national living wage kicks in regarding apprenticeships, and also how we're going to feed back our views on the national living wage to government.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good point on the apprenticeships and the age groups. So yeah, thank you, Rachel. I'd love to discuss that and happy to do so. I think our contact details were at the end of the presentation, so do feel free to drop me a note on that, and it'd be good to chat about it. In terms of feeding back further on a national living wage, there are the formal structures for us to do that. In terms of sort of consultations and submitting evidence, which we do every year and will continue to do. Outside of that, we obviously meet regularly with the government departments that are responsible for this, including the Employment Minister. And so, there are plenty of avenues for us to sort of make a robust case on the national living wage and really impress upon not just the Low Pay Commission, but on the government ministers who are actually signing off the decisions, exactly the impact that this is having on our members. So that feedback from the polling question this morning is really helpful in terms of sort of strengthening our case to do that.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to move back to Fahim. So, Fahim, could you answer the feedback on full expensing is helpful, but there's two big issues, and also the Nat's point on fiscal drag?
I'm just reading those questions now. Yeah. So on the leasing part, so I can't say with any certainty if the Treasury is going to include it after the technical consultation. This will probably depend on the quality of the support and feedback we get from you guys, the members, and how much you're able to indicate how important that's going to be, and what value that could bring to the Treasury. I know that it has been discussed before when super deduction was first introduced, and they highlighted two different things, two different challenges around. The first one was, and the Treasury used this point in R&D tax credits as well, is the risk of fraud in the system if you allow for leasing. So in R&D you have the rise of middlemen, and they didn't think that was a good thing. If you were to include for leasing, then they fear that there's going to be the rise of the middleman who uses the system to lease out more capital machinery. Now, of course, it's up to us to demonstrate to them that actually there are some businesses, and you're right, is it a big versus small? That is exactly what we see in our own data. We find that about 15% of manufacturers in our own surveys access plant and machinery through leasing. And when you break that data down by business size, it's almost all SMEs with less than 249 employees. Actually, in the large business category of anything more than 500 employees is almost a 0% of businesses that lease plant and machinery. So if the government were to move in that direction to include leasing, we would see that the benefit would translate more to the SMEs, and that's something that we would want to see. I'm just going to quickly just have a look at the other question on fiscal drag. So yes, I think that is a big issue. It was a bit of a sleight of hand, I suppose, in the autumn statement, that whilst there was some positive announcements like full expensing, the overall burden, the tax burden on the UK population is, I think, the highest in 38 years. And this was according to the OBR's own estimates that they had advised the Chancellor that this is what will be happening. And so the movement isn't necessarily going to be beneficial for the average. And I think maybe even Jamie can jump in on some of this stuff around support for employment. But this, the media has obviously been using words like pre-electioneering and I think that sort of thing. I'm sure some of that played a role in some of the announcements and the way that they had presented it. I saw somebody on Twitter, X or whatever you call it, say that if you've got 110 measures, then you probably have 0, because actually it's not, it doesn't make sense to have so many. So that is a challenge, but it's something that we will definitely be looking at.
Great, thank you, Fahim. There's a point from David on sector-specific programs often used by politicians because they're easy to roll out, because they're easy to understand, and actually it's better to focus on non-sector specific technologies. I think we would tend to agree with you, David. This was something that actually when Department of Trade and Business first mentioned to us, they went, we know you won't be a fan of this because it is particularly sector specific and not wide ranging. We would see our challenge back to government, I think, would be this is why you need a long-term plan, a long-term strategy, industrial strategy, to be able to look at this in an overarching way rather than focusing on the easy to understand manufacturing sectors. I am going to go, oh, I can see Nina's already typing an answer, but I might just hand over to you, Nina, if that's all right, on R&D tax relief.
Oh yeah, I was just answering, I was just typing in. So Lois, who is here on the call, but I'm not going to ask her to speak, but please, she's managing a relationship with one of our partners who's helping, they're helping manufacturers for R&D tax credits. So please get in touch with Lois, and I'm sure she'll be able to assist and help with that. Yeah, projects like R&D tax credit scheme is probably one of the most well-known and used by manufacturers in terms of getting any support, a cashback from Treasury when investing in R&D. But still, I think more manufacturers should be able to and should have access and be able to use it.
Great, thank you, Nina. And Annette helpfully said in the Q&A, it'd be helpful for those who think that they're not going to plan accessing Rain Smarter, reasons why. And she said she's recommended speaking or contacting, sharing the reasons why at the regional member with their regional membership manager, because that'd be helpful for us as well, because there will be a challenge, I suspect, from government if it's not uptaken more. But why is that? So it'll be helpful for us to feed into the planning of that as well from your feedback. I can see a question about, I think leasing, remanufacture is really important in the sustainability journey, as opposed to buying new. Will the costs associated with this be covered in full expensing? So I believe that is the point of leasing or second hand, is it? Which I think, Fahim, you've already touched on.
Yes, so that essentially would be classed as second hand, so it wouldn't be be counted for in full expensing. But that is a problem that actually we have raised before, and certainly something that we would be keen to get more feedback on, particularly on refurbished second-hand goods, especially businesses who are able to refurbish them and bring them up to meet the standards of brand new equipment in terms of energy efficiency and quality and output. There is I think an educational piece required to show government that actually those kind of products cash should be accounted for. I think that the challenge that Treasury will find is how do they know, what is a good second-hand plant and machinery equipment and what is not a good one, and how I think that the risk is that they get this create this black market. Again, they always go back to the misuse and the fraud as their main counter to those actions, but we have definitely spoken to members who have specialized in refurbishing, for example, battery technologies, and they bring them up to meet the standards of modern technologies, and so they are effectively as good as any brand new battery technologies. So that is something that so to answer your question, the answer is no, it's not, but we want evidence to help us argue against government that actually it should be.
Thanks, Fahim. And then I can see a final point about about with no NI drop is a massive impact on small businesses as we know increase to our prices. So yes, that was our first reaction when we heard of the government accepting the Low Pay Commission's recommendations, and that will be something we'll be feeding back as useful with our polling as well that we're taking today to government. I've got one further question, and if you've got anything else, now is the time, because we've got a few minutes left. This is a question for Jamie. With labour shortages so acute now, was there any support on retraining or making it easier to recruit from overseas, which is obviously a bit of a hot topic or a controversial topic for the government right now? It would be helpful to touch on that, Jamie.
Yeah, so touched on the small change to the business visitor visa, which was the only thing we heard in the autumn statement on immigration. In terms of recruitment from overseas, that obviously continues to be incredibly sensitive for government. If you saw the net migration figures come out yesterday, they are higher than the government wants them to be, and so there are rumours swirling that they are looking for ways to further restrict legal migration, which is not going to be helpful in terms of addressing labour shortages. We are seeing the situation ease slightly. There is a slight loosening of the labour market, I think, over the last couple of months, but those recruitment challenges are still there. Some of the stuff the government announced this week in terms of support for apprenticeships, we hope some support coming on occupational health will help with that a little bit, but there's still quite a bit more to be done. So whether that's flexibility on the apprenticeship levy, more targeted support for upskilling and retraining, more tangible support for occupational health, easements in the immigration system, targeted at those specific occupations that we know are suffering from persistent shortages. There's much more the government could be doing, but we didn't hear much on that this week. Thank you,
Jamie. And apologies for missing this question, but it was on full expensing. So Anonymous has put in the chat that they say there's two big issues with permanent full expensing. They don't believe there's no net long-term benefit, just acceleration of tax deduction, and it's not useful for pre-profit companies. Are we discussing this with the government?
Yeah, so both of those points are correct. So there is no long-term benefit because it just changes the timelines of when you pay your corporation tax, which is why we also argue to government that there's also no long-term cost, because over time they just get their corporation tax later on in the years. And the second thing, it is no use to a business if you are not making any profit. So both of these points are made. We have had discussions in the past about whether or not the investment in plant and machinery can be accumulated within the R&D tax credit system, because that might be a better system to help businesses who are loss-making to access. And that is, whilst we had those discussions, they didn't necessarily produce any positive outcomes yet. I mean, it's an argument that we'll probably continue to make, but I think there's not a lot of evidence behind why they should do this. I think it's also important to understand what is the point of capital allowances. Why do countries even do them if there's no long-term financial gain to both the business and the government? It's all about managing cash flow. That is what it's used for. Most of our members will tell us that it's not changing when they pay their corporation tax. It's about managing cash flow in the year that they make their investment, and having 100% capital allowance in the first year helps management of that cash flow. Our own evidence shows that cash is one of the biggest factors to correlating with investment decisions. Policies like full expensing doesn't actually impact the decision that a business might make on investment. They just helps with cash flow, but cash does a huge impact. It not only affects whether or not what kind of investments you'll make, it also impacts the access you'll have to external finance, like if you're willing to take out like loans from private banks or get access to subsidies, often showing that you have positive cash flow in your own accounts is a viable way to highlight whether or not the projects that you are working on is going to be if they're going to have positive ROIs or not. So we do make these points, and we are always banging on about them to government. At the moment, there is no real solution, although we have ideas, but we're definitely open to any other ways to make the system better for manufacturers.
Thank you, Fahim. Nina, could you just in almost 3 sentences for Mark benefit, just summarise the two main changes of the R&D tax relief change?
So there's so the R&D tax credit, they were reviewing it and reforming for the past year. So there are some changes in terms of percentages that manufacturers can claim. But this time, the big announcement and big changes that they merging the 2 schemes, the SME scheme and the RDEC scheme, which was previously mostly used by the larger manufacturers. And these 2 are merging now, and the consequences of that and the changes in the percentages, we have a little bit more on the blog about this, but also I'm sure we just need to dive in more into details because it's a tax issue. We need some tax experts, but we'll definitely post something more about it, detailing how manufacturers will be affected by it, especially the SMEs, and also because there is some issues with the larger manufacturers using the subcontracting a smaller one, so it's all connected, and we'll keep you updated.
That pulls us into time. Thank you everyone for attending, and thanks to our presenters for taking us through all that detail. There's a slide here with our contact details if you'd like to reach out to us directly, and we very much welcome that. If not, you can contact your membership managers and we can do it via that way. But thank you very much for all your questions and feedback, and have a great day. Thanks all.
Thank you all.